My name is Sienna Roth. I'm 29, and 2 days ago I stopped believing in the word family. I was sitting across from my younger cousin Clarissa in the dining room. I grew up in our grandparents' grand old house in Asheville, North Carolina. The same room where we celebrated birthdays, graduations, and once my acceptance letter to Duke. Except this time, Clarissa wasn't smiling. She was flipping through a stack of legal papers with a look that made my skin crawl. "You've got 72 hours to move out," she said flatly, not even bothering to look up. "Excuse me," I blinked. "Out of where?" She placed the papers down gently like a cat playing with a bird it had already killed. "This house. It belongs to me now. Grandpa changed the will." My mother Erin gave me a look I'll never forget. The kind you give someone drowning when you've already decided not to jump in. And my stepfather Russell focused on cutting his lamb chop like he wasn't hearing a word. It hit me then this wasn't some legal mix-up. This was premeditated, and I was the only one who hadn't read the script. I guess I should back up. You deserve to understand the whole train wreck. Just 3 months ago, I was thriving, working as a senior account manager at a digital branding agency in Chicago, with a rent-controlled apartment and a view of the skyline that made even the bad days bearable. But then our agency merged with a ruthless tech firm and everything changed overnight. My entire department was axed under departmental realignment. What a pretty term for being thrown into the void. With bills stacking up and the job market treating me like a ghost, I made the reluctant decision to move back to Asheville just for a while. Grandpa Eli had always said his door was open, especially after Grandma Rose passed away. That house had been my second skin growing up. And for a brief, naive moment, I thought I'd find comfort there again. When I showed up in the rain with 2 suitcases and a duffel bag, Mom hugged me like I was a distant cousin, not her daughter. "You look tired," she said, eyeing my unwashed hair. Russell, her second husband and human-shaped tax deduction, barely grunted. Grandpa Eli, on the other hand, lit up like I'd brought sunshine. He patted the spot beside him on the porch swing and asked about my portfolio, my apartment, whether I was still painting on the side. That conversation lasted nearly an hour. And during it, I saw something I hadn't in a long time, someone genuinely proud of me. Clarissa didn't show up until the weekend after. She made her entrance like she always did in a luxury SUV, sunglasses on indoors, greeting Grandpa with a kiss and handing me a bag of vegan dog treats, even though I don't have a dog. She always had to feel superior. We used to be close, believe it or not. But somewhere between age 16 and her trust fund maturing, Clarissa changed. The girl who once gave me her last cupcake in middle school had become a shark with a Cartier anklet. Her favorite sport, passive-aggressive sabotage. You name it, job interviews, dates, even my thesis presentation in college, she found ways to one-up, overshadow, or outright hijack. But I never thought she'd do this. It started with little things. Grandpa suddenly seemed more withdrawn. I'd catch him staring out the window after Clarissa left, rubbing his temple like something was bothering him. Then came the whispering. Mom and Russell would go silent the second I walked in the kitchen. Envelopes addressed to me went missing. Grandpa's attorney, Mr. Kirsch, canceled a lunch we'd planned 3 times in a row, and Clarissa. She started visiting more often than she ever had in the last 10 years combined. Sometimes she'd walk in and head straight to Grandpa's study, closing the door behind her. I wasn't stupid, I knew something was off, but I didn't have proof until the dinner. Clarissa orchestrated the whole thing like a Broadway production. Formal attire, 7 p.m. sharp. Grandpa's favorite dinner, the text read. Even that felt off. Clarissa didn't cook. She didn't care about Grandpa's traditions. But I played along. I wore the blue dress he loved, the one Grandma used to call my ocean armor. I even brought him a framed sketch of the house I'd been working on in my downtime. Naive, right? The dining room looked like something out of an inheritance drama. Crystal glasses, handwritten place cards, the good silver. Even the dusty chandelier had been polished. And then there was Clarissa seated at the head of the table like she was Queen Elizabeth, flanked by Russell and Mom on one side, me and Grandpa on the other. The appetizer was chilled shrimp with avocado mousse. Grandpa barely touched his. When dessert came, Grandma Rose's blackberry tart recipe, of course. Clarissa stood up like she was announcing a war. "I know this will come as a surprise," she began. "But out of respect for transparency, I think Sienna deserves to know now rather than later." She slid the manila envelope toward me. Inside, a notarized copy of Grandpa's will. His updated will, dated just 6 weeks ago. It transferred full ownership of the house and everything in it to her. "She's been managing things so well," Mom added, not meeting my eyes. "She has vision," Russell chimed in. "Knows how to use the property." I turned to Grandpa, hoping, begging for denial. But he looked broken. "She said you were moving back to Chicago. That this was temporary," he mumbled, voice cracking. "She said she'd help maintain the rose garden." My stomach dropped. The rose garden, the one I'd tended every day since returning. The one I'd promised Grandma I'd never let die. "Grandpa, I never said she showed me your resume," Clarissa cut in smoothly. "All those rejection emails. She said you needed to focus on rebuilding, that this house would only hold you back. It wasn't just betrayal, it was character assassination. She made me sound like a squatter, like dead weight." The kicker, Grandpa had written me a handwritten note the week before, tucked inside a book on the shelf. He called me his legacy. Said the house felt alive again with me in it. That letter was gone now. I searched every inch of my room later. Nothing. So I did the only thing I could. I got up. I looked Clarissa in the eye and said, "You may have gotten the paper, but this house isn't yours." "Not really." She raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly are you going to do about it?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know yet. But I would. I was done being the girl who got pushed aside. I just didn't know then how far I'd have to go. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in the guest room that suddenly felt like enemy territory, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above me like it might fling off its hinges at any moment. Every click of its blade sounded like a clock ticking down to my eviction. I was supposed to be gone in 72 hours. Just enough time for Clarissa to enjoy the satisfying drama of my quiet exit. She thought I'd disappear like a well-mannered loser. She hadn't accounted for one thing: I still had fight left in me. At 3:12 a.m., I got up. My suitcase was half packed already, but I wasn't touching it. Not yet. Instead, I dug out my sketchbook and started writing, not drawing. I needed clarity more than creativity. I wrote down every strange moment from the last 6 weeks. The missing letters, Grandpa's changing mood, Clarissa's sudden visits, Mom's twitchy energy, Russell's smarmy smiles. The pattern sharpened with each note I jotted down. This wasn't just a power grab. It was a full-blown scheme. By dawn, my plan had a heartbeat. First, I needed information. And I knew exactly where to start: Mr. Kirsch, Grandpa's longtime estate attorney. I'd known him since I was 13. He gave me my first ever internship filing dusty deeds in a closet the size of a broom cupboard. He used to slip me peppermints while talking about the importance of legal precision. I called his office. No answer. I left a polite voicemail, then a firm one. On the third attempt, I changed my tone. "Mr. Kirsch, it's Sienna. I know about the will. I need to understand what happened. If there's anything you think I should see, I'd appreciate it. Especially anything dated before August." A pause. Then, as if the voicemail gods blessed me, he picked up. "Come by before lunch, and don't use the front entrance. We'll talk in my library." That told me everything I needed to know. Mr. Kirsch's library was really a back office that smelled of old scotch and worn leather. He gestured me in without a word and shut the door behind me. I noticed he'd aged since I'd last seen him. Lines deeper, hands slower, but his mind was sharp. Dangerous, sharp. "I shouldn't be doing this," he muttered, pulling out a red folder from a locked cabinet. "But I owe your grandfather more than just legal loyalty." What Clarissa did, well, let's say she didn't exactly act alone. He laid out the paper trail like it was a crime scene. Grandpa had revised his will twice in the last year. The first revision, dated in May, left the house in a trust for continued legacy care, naming me as co-trustee. The second revision, the one Clarissa had waved in my face, was signed in early September, just weeks after Grandpa was hospitalized for a fall. A fall that, according to Kirsch's notes, resulted in mild cognitive impairment and heavy pain medication. She brought in her own notary for the second draft, he added grimly. It technically passed, but the timing, the witness affidavits, it's suspect. If you want to contest it, there's ground. The ground wasn't just solid, it was screaming for a legal war. I walked out of his office with a USB drive, 2 affidavits, and my blood boiling. Clarissa hadn't just manipulated Grandpa. She'd hijacked his declining health, weaponized it. This wasn't some rich girl power play. It was elder exploitation. Still, evidence wasn't enough. I needed leverage, not just legal ammunition, but public sympathy. And I had a secret weapon no one else remembered: my grandmother's journals. She was meticulous. Each day of her final decade was documented in soft-covered notebooks with floral bindings stored in the attic chest nobody had opened since the funeral. Most of the family dismissed it as sentimental clutter, but I remembered. She used to read me excerpts like bedtime stories when I was little. If there were doubts about Clarissa's loyalty or details Grandma had picked up about her greed, it would be in those pages. I waited until Russell took Mom to her afternoon yoga class. Clarissa, I knew, had left earlier for her design consultation downtown. That gave me exactly 90 minutes alone in the house. I crept into the attic like I was breaking into a vault. The chest was still there, covered in dust but locked. I didn't even hesitate. I grabbed a hammer from the basement, wedged it under the latch, and snapped it open. The journals were untouched. 12 of them, one for every year since Grandma's retirement. I flipped through the later entries, hands trembling. Halfway through the 11th book, dated March 14th, I found what I didn't even know I'd been hoping for. Clarissa visited again. She brought that realtor friend, tried to walk through the house with a measuring tape while Eli napped. I told her to leave. She called me sentimental and obsolete. I pretended not to cry until she was gone. My chest tightened, but it got worse. March 20th, Clarissa asked me again about changing the will. Said she could do more with the property than Sienna ever could. Eli told her no. I thought that was the end of it. But I've seen her speaking to Aaron in whispers lately. Something is wrong. These weren't just journal entries, they were testimony. I photographed every page, uploaded them to the cloud, and emailed myself backups. War was coming. I spent that night in silence, sitting beside Grandpa in his reading chair while he dozed. He looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile. I reached for his hand and he stirred, blinking slowly. You know, he whispered, I only signed that new draft because she said you'd already left. That you got a job offer in New York. My throat tightened. She lied, Grandpa. I never left. He nodded slowly. Thought so, but I didn't know who to believe anymore. I could see the weight on him, the fog they'd wrapped around his brain. The manipulation was deep, strategic, and worst of all, it worked. They'd isolated him until reality blurred, but that was over now. I'm not going anywhere, I said, voice steady, and I'm not letting them rewrite this family. He closed his eyes again, fingers curling around mine. I always knew you had her fire, he whispered. Her, Grandma. Clarissa stole a signature, but I had something better history. The next morning, I made eggs like nothing had changed. Toasted sourdough, fresh coffee in the mug Grandma once used. Clarissa walked in halfway through my second bite wearing a silk robe she didn't even pretend was borrowed. She poured herself a cup without asking and didn't say good morning. I assume you're packing, she said flatly, stirring almond milk into her coffee with one of Grandma's teaspoons. I swallowed my bite and looked her dead in the eye. I'm not going anywhere. Her smile curled at the edges like spoiled fruit. Oh, Sienna, please don't make this uglier than it has to be. You always overestimate how much people are willing to fight for you. I said nothing. She left her cup half full and walked out like a queen done entertaining a jester. But she'd made her first mistake talking like she'd already won. She hadn't even seen the battlefield yet. That afternoon, I met with someone I hadn't spoken to since high school, Elliot Chase. Back then, he was the boy with calloused hands and a camera always hanging around his neck. Quiet, sharp, always watching. Now he was a full-fledged documentary filmmaker based out of Charlotte with an Emmy nomination and a well-earned reputation for exposing family estates gone rotten. I didn't reach out to him as a friend. I reached out because I needed a truth teller. Someone whose lens didn't blink. He met me at a quiet corner booth in a bakery off Main. I laid everything out, the revised will, the missing letters, the journal entries, even the whispers of medical coercion. He listened without interrupting, nodding, occasionally his fingers tapping a rhythm against his cup. When I finished, he said the two words that changed everything. "I believe you." I hadn't realized how badly I needed someone to say it. To believe me without looking for a loophole or playing devil's advocate. "I won't film anything unless you want me to," he added. "But if you do want this documented, if this turns into court or worse family war, you're going to need more than memory. You'll need record." I nodded slowly. I don't need to ruin her life. I just want my grandfather's truth back. Elliot's eyes sharpened. Sometimes those are the same thing. Back at the house, I played it cool. I made small talk. I watered the rose garden. I offered to help Mom with groceries, even though she barely looked me in the eye. Every time Clarissa entered a room, I noted the pattern her pauses before answering her glances toward Grandpa's study, the phone always gripped tightly in her hand. She was waiting for something, watching for signs of collapse. She didn't know that I'd already started building mine. The next day, I went into Grandpa's study with his permission and replaced the bookends on his shelf with ones I'd rigged to hold a micro recorder Elliot had given me. Nothing illegal, no hidden cameras, just clean audio family dinner conversations, offhand remarks, legal threats, whispered plans. If Clarissa wanted to turn this into a chess match, I'd play Queen's Gambit and smile while doing it. Elliot gave me a crash course in passive recording ethics and how to collect verbal patterns without interfering. I practiced active listening, let people talk, and took mental notes of everything that felt off. The most revealing conversations didn't come from Clarissa, though. They came from my mother. One evening, as we stood in the kitchen drying dishes, she finally cracked. "You should have stayed gone," she muttered. Her eyes locked on the dripping plate in her hand. I froze. "Excuse me." Her lips thinned. "You were always the child who needed chaos to feel important. Always poking the bear. Never satisfied. Now you've dragged your dying grandfather into another one of your little battles." I stared at her disbelief, making my voice rise. "He's not dying. He's being manipulated. And you're letting it happen." She turned to face me then. Really faced me. "You don't get it, do you? Clarissa has a plan, a vision. She'll turn this place into something valuable. You'd keep it stuck in the past with your paintings and your dusty rose bushes." My hands clenched the towel without realizing it. "So you'd rather betray your father's wishes for a profit margin?" She didn't answer. I didn't push. But that was the second mistake she made, admitting she had a side, and it wasn't mine. The next day, Clarissa brought a man in a blazer and tight jeans to the house. A developer judging by the car and the drone footage they kept reviewing on an iPad. They stood in the backyard for nearly an hour, pointing at the rose garden, the guest house, the lake view. I watched from the upstairs hallway, my stomach coiling tighter with every passing minute. When they left, I slipped out to the garden. I dug near the third rose bush on the right. Years ago, Grandma had told me it was her safe spot. Underneath, wrapped in oilcloth, was a rusted tin box. Inside were letters, over 30 of them, addressed to Grandpa, dated across 4 decades. Most of them were ordinary, grocery lists, garden notes. But 2 were everything. One confirmed that Clarissa had tried to convince Grandma to list the house quietly 5 years ago, well before the will was even discussed. The second was a letter to me, written in Grandma's thin, careful script. She must have known I'd find it someday. If you're reading this, I hope it's because you fought to keep what matters. This house has never been about walls. It's been about roots, about memory. You're the only one who ever understood that. Don't let money people win. They forget that legacies are lived, not sold. I cried quietly in the garden for a long time. Then I took the letters straight to Elliot. He read them in silence, jaw tightening with each line. "This is your heart shot," he whispered. "This turns your story from inheritance to moral theft." He began planning a full expose audio log scans of Grandma's letters, even interviews with townspeople who knew her. We agreed to hold the footage until I decided if I wanted it public. But I already knew. I wasn't going to strike back in court just yet. I was going to strike back socially. I started small. A post on the local community page. A tribute to Grandma Rose. 1 year since she passed, I wrote attaching a photo of her with the roses and a note about how her home had always been a haven for neighborhood children and lost pets. The post gained traction. Comments from locals flooded in. Stories, gratitude, offers to volunteer in the garden if the home ever reopened for the community. Clarissa saw it the next day. Her smile was tight, her eyes calculating. That was the third mistake. She underestimated how quickly a reputation can unravel once you pull a single thread. That night, I sat beside Grandpa again, holding his hand. "I'm not just doing this for the house," I told him softly. "I'm doing this because people like her think truth is negotiable. Like decency can be signed away with the right lawyer." He smiled faintly. "Remind me to put that on a t-shirt." We sat there in silence, the kind that felt warm rather than hollow. I didn't know what the next move would be yet, but I knew I had the upper hand, and I was going to use it. By the end of the week, I'd become a topic of conversation in town, and not the kind that hides behind closed doors. It started with the tribute post, sure, but it was the second one that really stirred the pot. I posted an old photo from the 1987 town fair. Grandpa and Grandma standing in front of the original Rose Garden booth, both beaming like the world didn't know how to break hearts yet. Captioned simply, "Legacy isn't real estate. It's roots. It's what they grew here." The comments section exploded. I still remember her giving my daughter free blooms after a bad recital. "She taught my son how to cut back thorns. Said everything with beauty has to learn defense." We'd all be worse off if that house disappeared. I never once mentioned Clarissa. I didn't have to. The contrast spoke louder than accusation ever could. Clarissa saw it. She stopped making small talk entirely after that. Mom got twitchy. She started clearing her throat at odd moments, offering me overly polite suggestions like, "Maybe it's time you focused on finding an apartment, sweetheart," or, "You don't want to get too attached to the past, do you?" But it was too late for those veiled warnings. People were watching now. The next hit came without warning, and this time it wasn't from Clarissa, it was from Russell. He called a family meeting, his voice full of that manufactured calm he used to wear during tax season arguments back when he still pretended to be the logical stepfather. We gathered in the sunroom, mid-afternoon light, casting long shadows on the floor. Grandpa was dozing in his chair, but I positioned myself near him anyway, like a reminder of what this was really about. Russell cleared his throat theatrically. "Sienna," he began, hands clasped like a TV pastor. "We've noticed you've been stirring the community." Clarissa leaned forward. "It's manipulative. You're painting this place like it's some public museum when it's private property. My property." I kept my face calm. "I never said it wasn't. I'm just sharing stories. People seem to care." "People don't know the full story," Russell said quickly. "They don't understand the legal changes, the transition, the plans for the land." "You mean the development project?" I asked softly. "The one that removes the garden and puts up event spaces, wedding venues with Clarissa's brand name on the gates?" Clarissa's eyes sharpened. "That's confidential." I nodded. "Not anymore." I reached into my tote and pulled out a printed copy of the zoning request she'd filed under her LLC, complete with architectural sketches and a list of vendors. Courtesy of a friend at City Hall who'd been more than happy to confirm what the community was already whispering about. "You've been calling it a legacy plan," I said, turning toward Mom, "but it's a liquidation strategy. A rebrand of everything Grandma built." Clarissa's mouth opened, but Russell cut her off. "Enough. You're not the victim here, Sienna. You're squatting in a home that no longer belongs to you. That will is final." That was when Grandpa spoke. "Maybe the ink is final," he said, voice quiet but steady. "But my mind isn't." All eyes turned to him. "I may have signed that document," he continued, looking at Clarissa now, "but I didn't understand what I was signing. And I never agreed to turn this house into a venue." Clarissa stood abruptly. "You told me you trusted me to handle it." "I trusted you to protect the family," he said, "not sell it to the highest bidder." Silence fell like a dropped plate. That night, Clarissa left in a huff, tires kicking up gravel like a warning shot. But it was already too late. Her fourth mistake, she miscalculated Grandpa's silence. She thought confusion meant agreement, but the fog had lifted, and what he remembered now would become her undoing. The next day, Elliot arrived with his gear and a simple question, "Are you ready to go on record?" I was. We sat in the study where the sun always fell soft on the bookshelf. Grandpa looked tired, but when I placed the microphone near him, he straightened in his chair like a soldier answering roll call. Elliot asked gentle questions about Grandma the house, the change in the will. I was scared, Grandpa admitted. They made it sound like Sienna had moved on, like she didn't care anymore. I didn't want the house to fall apart. He paused. But it wasn't falling apart. It was just waiting for her to come back. His words made my chest tighten. Elliot captured it all, the tremble in his voice, the way his hands shook, but his eyes stayed steady. We ended the session with one final question. If you could say anything to Clarissa right now, what would it be? Grandpa didn't hesitate. I raised you better. By Thursday, whispers had become rumors, and rumors had become movement. The local paper ran a front-page story. Historic Roth home faces commercial flip community pushes back. They quoted neighbors, former students of Grandma's garden classes, even a city archivist who declared the home a cultural touchstone. I didn't plant that article. Someone else submitted the tip, but I wasn't surprised. Truth has a way of growing when you water it even quietly. Clarissa called me that evening. I almost didn't answer. Enjoying your 15 minutes, she asked, voice cold. I didn't start this war, I replied, but I'm sure as hell going to end it. She scoffed. You think public sympathy changes a will? No, I said, but it makes lawyers nervous. She hung up without another word. And then unexpectedly, something changed in Mom. She found me the next morning on the porch, coffee in hand, eyes still puffy from sleep. For the first time in weeks, she sat beside me without an agenda. You know, she said quietly, your grandmother used to say you see things before the rest of us do, like storm clouds. I said nothing. She took a breath. I haven't been a good mother in all this. I let myself get swept up in Clarissa's plans because they looked clean, manageable. You bring emotion into every room. That's not a flaw, I said softer than I intended. She looked at me, eyes glistening. I know that now. It wasn't a full apology, but it was something. And something sometimes is all you need to keep going. That night, Elliot handed me the first cut of our interview footage. I watched it alone, headphones on, heart pounding. There was Grandpa holding truth like a sword with a trembling hand. There was me quietly explaining the difference between inheritance and love. There was Grandma's letter read aloud over slow footage of the rose garden in golden light. When it ended, I didn't cry. I stood up, opened the window, and breathed. Clarissa thought this was a chess match, but she didn't realize she was playing on a board built by people who valued roots over royalty. And I had the home field advantage. I woke up to headlines. Literally. The local morning paper's second feature ran with a photo of the rose garden and a bold title beneath it. From petals to profits, granddaughters fight to preserve Roth home sparks town debate. They'd interviewed half the neighborhood without me knowing. Elliot had shared his footage selectively with trusted local figures, the ones who cared more about heritage than market value. Apparently, it had made its way into the hands of an editor who remembered Grandma Rose teaching her daughter how to prune irises in the backyard in 1996. The piece was elegant, honest, and devastating to Clarissa's campaign. The accompanying photo showed Grandpa holding a small trowel beside me. 2 generations, still planting, still hoping. By noon, the story was circulating on regional news outlets. By evening, a zoning oversight committee had issued a public statement. Pending formal review of the Roth property's historical significance, all permits regarding commercial redevelopment are to be temporarily suspended. That single sentence changed the air in the house. Clarissa arrived unannounced. No knock, no warning. She pushed the front door open and stood in the hallway like she still owned it. Her heels clacked across the wood floor like they were issuing commands. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counter, but I could hear her breathing tight, furious. I should have had you removed weeks ago, she hissed, her voice low but sharp. You want to fight, fine. But when this turns ugly, just remember you started it. I stepped into the doorway, calm, collected. Actually, Clarissa, you did. I just stopped pretending not to notice. She looked at me with that smirk she always used when she wanted to feel superior. But this time it didn't land. Because this time I wasn't standing alone. Mom stepped in from the porch holding a manila folder, one I hadn't seen before. Clarissa froze. You might want to sit, Mom said. Not a suggestion. Clarissa blinked. What is this? The financial audit. Mom replied, her voice steadier than I'd heard in years. Turns out the trust you said you were managing for Grandpa had a few holes in it. My stomach flipped. Mom handed the folder to me. Inside were printed bank statements, expenditures made from an account Clarissa had convinced Grandpa to consolidate last fall. Vacation rentals, spa invoices, a marketing firm based in Atlanta. None of it related to estate maintenance. "This isn't true," Clarissa said quickly. "You're twisting things," No Mom said softly. "You're caught." Clarissa's mouth opened, then closed. For once, she didn't have a prepared line. Later that night, after she stormed out again this time without her usual dramatic flourish, I sat with Mom on the porch swing, the sky ink black and full of cicada hums. "Why now?" I asked. She looked tired, worn down to the bone, but her eyes were clear. "Because I let fear speak for too long. Fear of losing comfort. Fear of conflict." Clarissa made it easy. She had plans, blueprints. She always had an answer. You just had roots. And I forgot which one mattered more. I leaned back, let the creak of the swing settle into my ribs. "You think she'll back off?" I asked. She shook her head. "She's too far in. But now you're not the only one standing between her and the bulldozers." The next morning, Elliot and I walked the perimeter of the property. Not filming, just talking, strategizing. There was no denying it anymore. The fight had gone public. The legal route was open but slow. We needed one more push. Something symbolic, visible, unignorable. So I did what Grandma would have done. I opened the gates, literally. That weekend, I hosted a public rose garden remembrance on the lawn. Free tea, storytelling, a photo wall of memories collected from neighbors. I even dug out Grandma's old jam recipe and made 40 jars each labeled Roth Reserve Keep Growing. People came in waves. Families, teachers, students. A man who'd proposed to his wife under the pergola 20 years ago. They brought folding chairs and home-baked cookies and stories I'd never heard. It wasn't just a garden anymore. It was a movement. Elliot filmed from a distance. No interviews. Just the wind through the rose bushes and children laughing near the koi pond. At one point, Grandpa stood and thanked everyone, his voice cracking but clear. This house was built with love. And no matter what papers say, love doesn't expire. The applause was soft, teary, but more powerful than any judge's gavel. The backlash arrived 3 days later. Clarissa filed a cease and desist letter through her attorney demanding the immediate cancellation of unauthorized use of private property for public assembly. She also filed an emergency motion to accelerate the probate validation of the contested will, trying to lock it in before the historical designation review could finish. I wasn't surprised. This was her cornered. And cornered people lash. But she'd already underestimated me once. She wouldn't get that chance again. Mr. Kirsch and I filed our counter-motion within the hour. Elliot submitted an affidavit verifying Grandpa's cognitive state at the time of the new will's signing, including the conflicting journal entries and questionable notarization process. But the best piece came from someone I didn't even expect: Mrs. Florence Alcott, Grandma's best friend and a former judge. She submitted a written statement declaring she had direct personal knowledge of the testator's original intent and accused Clarissa of intentional manipulation under the guise of estate transition. That wasn't just support, it was fire. Clarissa's legal team would have to work overtime just to stay afloat. At night, I watched the sky from the upstairs window. The garden lights shimmered faintly below. I thought about everything we'd lost and what still could be saved. The house felt different now, not just heavier with history, but louder with it. Like the walls were finally speaking again after years of being ignored. I knew we weren't done. There'd still be hearings, questions, depositions, but we had momentum. Truth had roots. And now those roots were showing through the cracks in Clarissa's perfect image. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't alone anymore. And maybe for the first time in a long time, neither was this house. 3 days. That was how long the judge gave us before the emergency probate hearing. 72 hours to gather final evidence-polished testimony and brace for impact. Clarissa's team pushed for a private proceeding. To protect family dignity, they said. What they really meant was to keep things out of the public eye, away from the same community that had begun to see through the polished veneer she'd painted for years. But truth, once freed, doesn't go quietly back into hiding. I spent the first morning walking the garden alone. I didn't touch my phone, didn't check emails. I moved from rows to rows, whispering their names like prayers. Grandma had named them all Evelyn Solomon Lilies, Blue Heartstring. I crouched near Heartstring, traced the edge of a fallen petal, and whispered, "We're almost there." The wind stirred as if it answered. The second day, Elliot and I reviewed the footage one last time. We didn't need to play everything, just enough to draw the lines clearly: what was promised, what was stolen, and who was trying to rewrite history. We built a closing sequence, Grandpa reading from Grandma's journal. That single moment, his voice trembling as he read her handwriting, cut through every argument like a scalpel. Mom offered to testify. So did Mrs. Alcott. Mr. Kirsch would handle the legal framing. My role was simple: tell the truth in full and trust that it would land. By the third morning, the house felt unusually quiet. Even the floors stopped creaking, like they knew something sacred was about to happen. Court was held in a modest wood-paneled room on the second floor of the county building. Nothing grand, no cameras, no gavel-smacking theatrics, just paperwork, lawyers, and a judge who looked like she'd seen more than her share of greedy families. Clarissa arrived in all white, a statement. Clean lines, no frills. But her eyes gave her away, darting, calculating. She didn't nod at anyone, not even Grandpa. I sat beside him close enough that our shoulders touched. He wore his navy blazer and a tie with a faded rose print. He looked calm, but his hand found mine and I squeezed it gently. When the proceedings began, Clarissa's lawyer opened with poise. He emphasized legality, timelines, witness affidavits. He argued that the revised will had been signed in accordance with state law, witnessed, and notarized. Intent is not a feeling, he concluded. It is a signature on paper. When it was our turn, Mr. Kirsch rose slowly. He was deliberate, methodical, but firm. He began with the medical timeline, Grandpa's prescription record from the week the will was revised. He showed how the notary had been hired by Clarissa's firm, not an independent third party. Then he submitted a letter from Grandpa's physician expressing concern that any major legal decisions during that period would have been clouded by compromised cognitive clarity. Then came Mrs. Alcott. She didn't speak like a witness. She spoke like a guardian. "I sat with Rose the week before she passed," she said plainly. "She told me that the house was meant for Sienna, that she was the one who remembered how to love things that grow." Clarissa's lawyer objected. The judge overruled it. Then Elliot played the footage. It started with Grandma's letter read aloud by Grandpa, voice low but firm. Then clips from the community event. Children running near the fountain. Neighbors talking about what the home meant. No narration, just quiet humanity. The courtroom didn't stir, but I saw it: eyes softening, backs straightening, pens pausing. And then Grandpa stood. He took his time, walked to the front of the room, and looked the judge directly in the eye. "I was misled," he said. "I believed my granddaughter had moved on, abandoned this home." I didn't know what Clarissa planned. I didn't understand what she asked me to sign. I thought I was protecting the family. I didn't know I was giving it away. Clarissa's lawyer tried to object. The judge silenced him with a hand gesture. Grandpa looked over at Clarissa then. His face didn't show anger, just sadness. "You used to play hide and seek in the back garden," he said softly. "What happened to that little girl?" Clarissa didn't answer. The judge dismissed the court for deliberation. It took 90 minutes. The judge returned her expression unreadable. The court finds that while the revised will was technically executed, the circumstances surrounding its drafting raise sufficient ethical concerns. Further, the evidence presented, both medical and testimonial, demonstrates a pattern of manipulation that contradicts the intent of the testator. My heart stopped. She continued. Accordingly, the court rules to reinstate the prior will dated May of last year. The property shall be placed under the designated trust for preservation, with Sienna Roth and Elias Roth named co-trustees. I heard the breath escape Clarissa's chest like a balloon popped by a pin. She stood, said nothing, and walked out. No scene, no storming, just silence. That was her final mistake. She thought power could be worn, but it always lives in what you choose to protect. That evening, we didn't throw a party. We didn't pop champagne. We made stew, Grandma's favorite, with rosemary from the garden. Mom sat on the porch with a cup of tea, her shoulders finally relaxed. Elliot stayed for dinner. Grandpa fell asleep early, his hand wrapped around the letter he'd read in court. The garden glowed under the soft porch lights. Not flashy, just alive. I walked the path slowly, breathing it all in. The old wooden archway at the entrance still had the initials E+R carved into its post. I added my own underneath SR with the side of a garden knife. We weren't just rebuilding. We were restoring, not just a home, but a promise. 6 weeks later, the house received historical landmark designation. The development permits were officially rescinded. Clarissa quietly moved to Atlanta. I heard she tried to sue the city for loss of potential income. She lost. I kept the journal entries, the letters, the old trowel. I started hosting weekend garden workshops free for local kids. I painted again. Elliot sent a final cut of the footage to a small film festival. It won an audience award for Best Story of Preservation. Mom visits every Thursday now. Sometimes she brings cookies. Sometimes she brings silence. I take both as a gift. And Grandpa. He still sits on the porch every morning, greeting the roses like they're old war buddies. He smiles more, talks less. But when he looks at me, I see something I never quite saw before: peace. Real peace. I thought this fight was about a house. It wasn't. It was about dignity, memory, legacy. About proving that love isn't soft, that it stands its ground, that it roots deep and holds firm even when storms try to rewrite the map. I didn't win because I had better lawyers. I won because I remembered, and because I refused to let anyone pave over what was sacred just to build something shinier. Some homes don't need renovation. They just need someone to believe they're worth defending.
Story 2. I received the message uninviting me shortly after they sent the invitation on a Tuesday. The envelope had the thickness, cream color, and gold filigree that you would expect from an Ivy League wedding or a senator's fundraiser. The front said, Bristow Family Reunion, Fairmont Hotel, San Francisco, August 15th, 7 p.m. I didn't open it. Not necessary. The name of the hotel was too familiar. It was listed under the Elite Partners Platinum tier on my tablet's client list. That was my electronic signature verifying the reservation on the contract. My cousin Olivia, who is always the unofficial family coordinator, buzzed a message on my phone a few moments later. The one with the courteously wrapped bad news. Hello, Lila. Just so you know, this year's Fairmont is completely booked. It will be a formal event with many guests arriving by plane. I hope it works for you. The emoji, the unspoken symbol of exclusion. Not a complete rejection. A courteous erasure only. I had previously seen this. Birthday invitations never came. During career announcements, my name was silently removed from group chats. I was never called a failure. They simply acted as though I didn't exist. I went back to my desk. The San Francisco skyline glowed in a misty haze as the rain pattered softly against the window of my 27th floor corner office. My screen still displayed the Bristol event contract. Olivia made the reservation via my concierge platform at the Fairmont Hotel. It had been flagged for approval by our assistant. For last-minute high-profile reservations, I personally approved a 30% premium. They were unaware that the same girl who used to work late into the night cleaning hotel rooms was now the CEO of Morgan Properties, which owns 15 historic buildings across Northern California. Unpredictable lost cause was what they continued to whisper. Let them speak. I never desired their acceptance. The night was mine. I walked over to the bookshelf and took out a tiny black frame that was hidden behind my business books. There was a battered plastic badge inside. Lila Housekeeping, San Francisco Grand Pacific Hotel, 2013. That night, I placed it prominently on my desk to remind myself why I had said yes to myself when everyone else had said no, even though I hadn't seen it in years. There are two kinds of people in this world, according to my mother: those who inherit names and those who carry legacies. After supper, when the wine had relaxed her speech, she would whisper it. We were supposed to. Not as though everything he said was legally binding. When I first realized what my role was, I was 11 years old. The burden, not the name. They intended for me to join Morgan Capital as a junior associate by the time I turned 24. My name was already on the door of an office. Morgan Lila. Business plan. Less than a year passed. I asked the wrong questions, not because I didn't succeed. Inquiries concerning layoffs. No one provided an explanation regarding the outsourcing of janitorial staff or the long-term employees' disappearance of their retirement fund. Your thinking is too limited. From behind his desk of polished oak, my father let out a bark. "You're blind? No," I replied. "All I'm interested in is what people carry." Our last meaningful conversation ended there. Our relationship shifted to a quiet distance after that. Birthdays are disregarded, and texts are not read. I enrolled in and graduated first in my class from San Francisco State University's Hospitality Management program. Not one member of the family appeared. I was cleaning rooms at a dilapidated motel close to Market Street a year later. Each shift has 10 rooms, wet linen and towels that smelled like bleach. However, it was truthful. I started from scratch when building it. No freebies. Olivia sent me the wedding picture from her reception at that point. Everyone was glowing, smiling faces, sparkling champagne, and tailored suits. Even though I wasn't in the photo, I can still clearly recall that evening. A dishwasher was on break, and the DJ had left early, so I sat at a table close to the kitchen. Olivia explained that it was because I appeared more at ease there. A screenshot of a family group chat showed up in my inbox 2 days later. A picture with a caption of my old housekeeping badge. Cleaning rooms was her goal. She must have gotten what she wanted. They chuckled. Nobody raised their voice, not even Aunt Marlene. "You don't have to be like the others," said the aunt, who once gave me lemon drops in a whisper. I discovered that day, not all erasure is loud or furious. Sometimes there is silence. You sit far from the head of the table, get cropped out of enough pictures, leave off enough messages, and eventually start to question whether you were ever there at all. So I let it go. I started creating something that no one could ignore instead of waiting for them to notice me. With only 3 months' worth of savings, an old laptop, and one duffel bag, I left San Francisco. There was only a desperate need for silence, no grand scheme. Somewhere, no one gave a damn about my family, and my last name was irrelevant. In Woodstock, Vermont, I rented a tiny attic room in a dilapidated farmhouse. May and Frank, an elderly couple who operated it, paid me in cash to take reservations, change linens, and deal with latecomers. I was given room 9, which had a single bed, a skylight that framed the stars, and a low slanted ceiling. I adored it. That was the beginning of true solitude. The concept, not the company. I scrawled questions in a battered spiral notebook. What caused some visitors to return while others disappeared? Why would a stranger feel noticed in a place they had never been to before? Safe, I watched. I tried things out. A confused sign, a crooked bench, and a buzzing lamp. I made all the repairs without a budget. Just be mindful. Soon, guests started asking for Lila, not Miss Morgan, Miss Lila. When May and Frank decided to retire, I showed up with spreadsheets, market research, and a vision. I made an offer they accepted. I renamed it Maple House, my first property, my first real win. 5 rooms, no employees, just me. I poured my heart into it, scrubbing every floorboard, replacing musty curtains with linen panels, painting walls in soft shades of sage and cream on every nightstand. I left a handwritten card. "You're here now, you can rest." Guests remembered that line. I didn't hire a PR firm. I didn't need one. What did word of mouth do? No advertising effort could. Guests shared stories with their friends and raised awareness. Support came from attention. Not millions. Enough, but not overnight. I opened a second property, Maple Ridge, in less than 5 years. Then came a third, Maple Harbor, which was subtly superior to the larger resorts, despite being smaller. I gave them titles, respect, and fair pay when I promoted former housekeepers to site managers. No rigid uniforms, just dignified, real work. Subscribe right away if you think that starting over and quiet strength are powerful. You won't want to miss what comes next because Maple House's journey is just getting started. No hollow greetings, no phony smiles. Only those who proudly understood the true meaning of service. Never give in. By the time I turned 31, Maple House had subtly developed into a reputable brand of its own. Subtle luxury, careful consideration. No velvet ropes, no fountains made of marble. Only true dignity. Done correctly. I never signed my name on any of it, though. Under MP, the properties were listed. Morgan Holdings. Most people thought the CEO was a man who was ideal for me. I wasn't hiding, I was defending my creation. I was able to make something they couldn't destroy because of the silence. I kept my old plastic badge behind my desk, tucked away between vendor catalogs and fabric samples. The center of Lila's housekeeping was faded, cracked, and scratched. It should have been replaced long ago, but I wore it for a long time. Presented it simply, no glass black frame. Not affixed to any wall. Just for me, not for show. I held it some nights after countless spreadsheets and signatures. To remember the foundation, not to relive the suffering. I didn't construct Maple House to make a statement. I made it to fit in. One of Vermont's most upscale boutique hotels, Maple Harbor, was their choice for the family reunion. They didn't know. The corporate portal was used to make the reservation for Maple Harbor. In the family conversation, Olivia boasted about using her connections to get the desired location. "We're very fortunate," she said. The manager at the front desk informed her that although the owner was very private, everything was expedited as soon as they saw the family name. They were correct. I personally approved the linen color scheme, doubled the staff, upgraded their service, imported fresh flowers, and expedited it myself, naturally, digitally. Remember to subscribe if you experienced that silent moment of victory with me. When they eventually discover whose foundation they have been standing on, the next chapter begins. I hadn't signed a document in years, of course. When you leave, silence is the best defense. Not a single fingerprint. S. Bristow was listed as the host on the reservation, which was made using Morgan Hospitality's elite tier. The irony could have broken glass. Hannah, our guest relations manager, was reassigned to manage the account. Sophie was just another overly involved client who was fixated on spreadsheets and flower arrangements. She was intelligent, steady, and blissfully ignorant of family drama to Hannah. Sophie requested a custom floral arrangement with blue and white delphiniums and hydrangeas a week prior to the reunion. Hannah was summoned to my office. I told Hannah to be kind to them, but not gentle. Curious, she cocked her head. "What are you saying?" "Don't treat them like delicate glass. Simply serve them as they would like to be served." Slowly, a knowing smile crept onto Hannah's face as she nodded. I didn't have to explain everything to her. I sent just one message that evening. "You're coming, Janine and 2. Get there at 6:40. Avoid letting them in too soon." I saw the read receipt, but she didn't respond. That was sufficient. For the following 6 days, sleep was an uncommon visitor. I went over every aspect, including the menu options, signage, lighting cues, and room layout. I made one small adjustment at the last minute. Typically, a printed welcome note from the host family was placed in each guest suite. The card read this time, "We hope your visit serves as a reminder of your origins and what you never really lost." I didn't fully sign up, Layla. I didn't have to. On the day of the reunion, I didn't go through the front doors of the Grand. Rather, as I always did, I slipped in through the service entrance, passing carts full of fresh linens and trays of champagne glasses. Entering through the back door to enter the center of the house has a sacred quality. It helps you stay grounded. My outfit was navy, not wearing any jewelry. A hairpin. Quite nicely. Nothing. Called out for attention. For me, the room did that. They arrived in pairs at 6:45 p.m., followed by small groups. All the nervous sparkle of people who are desperate to be noticed, from loud laughter to firm handshakes. Sophie, too. Unaware that she was entering my home, she entered like a cruise director, grinning and waving. 10 minutes later, my father showed up with 2 strangers on either side. I instantly recognized sleepwatches, polished shoes, and finance types. The kind of men who use spreadsheets to build empires, but don't remember the janitors' names. From a tiny monitor hidden just past the kitchen hallway, I observed. Present, but hidden. I was not missed. The beauty of it was that no one searched for me anymore because I had been removed from their story so long ago. However, that was going to change. The ballroom lights dimmed just enough to silence the conversation and pique interest at precisely 7:15. Then the noise. 3 gentle chimes, slow and methodical. Sophie was in the middle of describing the personalized glassware. With a clipboard in hand and his customary cool professionalism, our guest services manager Everett came over to her. The owner has asked that we start the welcome presentation right away. Miss Bristow, he said softly. The owner was perplexed by Sophie's blinks. Well, I don't believe that's required. I have been working with your office for weeks, and we have already expressed our gratitude to the staff. Usually, the owner doesn't do these things. Everett remained silent. All he did was turn to the stage. The screen came to life. White and crisp with a soft navy background and a clean serif font it's hard to miss. Layla Morgan, the CEO and CEO of P. Morgan Holdings, founded Maple Harbor. The space grew cold. Sophie's float broke on the marble floor after slipping out of her hands. The back did not speak, but my father's jaw tensed. There was a murmur. Hold on what? Above the ballroom I stepped onto the landing. Baby dress poised and composed hairpin back heels clicking softly. I was just like the woman they said I would never be. Good night, I said in a calm, steady voice. I'm aware that many of you were surprised to see me here tonight. Hold on. When the table attempted to laugh, there was a nervous chuckle. After all, you didn't invite me. Letting the words hang, I said. However, I felt it was time for you to be properly welcomed to Maple Harbor. After all, I let my gaze roam the crowd. You're in my house right now. Mouths parted, chairs shuffled. Rose whispers. Sophie moved forward apprehensively. The cheeks turned red. Crazy! What are you doing, Lila? She muttered. I looked into her cool, unblinking eyes. Just like you taught me. Entering. This hotel was reserved in your name, I said in a quiet but distinct voice. You stated that the Bristow name was the reason the owner showed you courtesy, correct? That was accurate. I provided you with precisely what you requested, plus 20%. I spoke without flinching. That was the triumph. You talked about me for years as if I were some far-off embarrassment. A dropout, a housekeeper, the girl who squandered her name. You said I vanished. I didn't go away, though. They simply stopped observing. I looked around the room bases, older, more rigid, motionless, and adorned with the fragile astonishment of being caught off guard. Their uneasiness was nothing new. The story had changed, so it was simply louder now. My dad got up. Layla. His voice was unreadable and rough. This place is yours, I responded, equally across 4 states. Adding that I own 17. He didn't respond. Not necessary. I said, I'm not here for applause. I came to give something back. I nodded slightly in Hannah's direction. 2 team members, each carrying svelte black folders, followed her forward. Inside were signed event contracts, 1 for each visitor. Layla Morgan is her name. They have a single note and itemized rates. Occasionally, the story you attempted to remove still ends up on the wall close to the rear. Janine laughed softly, knowingly. Why didn't you use your full name from the beginning? A gentle older man standing next to my father asked. I hesitated because I wanted to construct something before anyone made a decision about what it should be. As I moved away, he nodded quietly and with understanding in his eyes. It was the noise, not the light, that dimmed the ballroom. I didn't feel invisible for the first time in years. A diplomat was discreetly assigned to the VIP suite that Sophie had insisted on calling 4 times to secure. Arriving late, she was heavily pregnant. Naturally, Sophie's new room was still lovely, but it was the same kind of alley that I used to clean for $9.75 an hour. Aunt Janine came looking for me, but my father never did. After 11 p.m., she knocked on the door of my office. She wasn't invited in. She didn't inquire. All she did was give me an envelope. It contained a picture I hadn't seen in many years. I was on the back porch of the old Bristow house, maybe 8 years old. My father's hand rested lightly on my shoulder while he held a pitcher of lemonade in both hands. Not for anything noteworthy, but because I spilt the lemonade a few minutes later, I remembered that day. Fearful of receiving a reprimand. Nobody spoke. They chuckled. I didn't feel like I belonged on the back again after that. You were woven into Janine's looping script. That was all. Before I could say anything, she was gone. I rode the elevator to the service floor the following morning. The housekeeping staff was getting started. Some gave a nod. A young woman grinned and then averted her gaze. I strolled over to the former supply room. Our break area is now. Near the rear wall was a coat rack. I took the framed name tag out of my bag. Lila, cleaning. Above the jackets, I hung it. No spotlight, no plaque, just a nail and some wood. Sophie left a note in her room later that day. We did something that you didn't deserve. Although I didn't respond, the return address appeared on the reunion invitations sent out the following spring. Caldwell Miracle at ellen.group. Please subscribe and stick around if my story speaks to you. I didn't construct Maple Harbor to make a statement. I constructed it to provide a home for people like us. Tell me what they attempted to remove from you in the comments section below. Even if the voice is only a whisper, it still matters. If you have ever been forgotten or forgotten, no, you are not by yourself. It matters how strong you are in silence. And your future is built with each little step you take. Together, we surpass everyone's expectations, so please subscribe and come along on this journey with me. Your assistance means the world to me.